Every day the war continues, Israel's isolation grows as Palestinians die from Israeli attacks and from a lack of food and aid. The United Nations now warns that starvation in Gaza is at the highest level since the fighting began. The hostages are also still stuck in this hellish condition. Recently, Arab and Muslim states, including Saudi Arabia, issued a joint call for Hamas to relinquish power in Gaza as part of efforts to end the war. Veteran diplomat Prince Turkey Al-Faisal has deep experience in the region. He served as Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the US and the UK. He was also head of Saudi Arabia's main foreign intelligence unit. So welcome back to our program.
Thank you, Ms. Amanpour. It's good to be back with you.
So there's so much to discuss about the military and political, but I want to first ask you whether you think that anything is possible to actually accomplish without an immediate halt to the massive humanitarian catastrophe, starvation, the dying of famine and hunger, the shooting of Palestinians who try to get to these highly mismanaged aid operations. Do you think anything can really be done without that being addressed first?
Well, it needs the United States to put its foot down. You know, in past history, America has put its foot down several times. I remind you when President Eisenhower forced the British, the French, and the Israelis to withdraw from Egypt during the Suez Crisis. And I remember when Mr. George Herbert Walker Bush forced Israel to attend the Madrid conference for a peace conference there. When Mr. Clinton at the Wye River talks forced Mr. Netanyahu himself to agree to the proposals put on the table at that time. So the U.S. has to put its foot down to prevent this genocide that is taking place at the hands of a psychopath. That's the only way I can describe him. He is using the American cudgel to beat everybody up, not just the Palestinians, but to prevent others from doing good for not just the Palestinians, but for the whole area.
So I assume when you use those words, obviously the Israelis would deny that, but I assume you're talking about Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I wonder what you're talking about, stopping others doing good as well. Do you mean yourself? I mean in terms of Saudi Arabia and the Arab states?
No, I'm talking about the rest of the world. The kingdom and the Arab states are doing their best. They're the ones who got the rest of the world now to recognize the state of Palestine as deemed by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And as the mandate that was put after the First World War initially proposed that there should be a Palestinian state. So the kingdom and its Arab partners are doing their best. It's the rest of the world that needs things to be done, and particularly the United States government.
Prince Turkey Al-Faisal, as you probably know because you probably read him, the veteran Haaretz columnist Gideon Levy, who's done a lot of work on the Palestinian side and has reported a lot of what's going on, he actually came out with this. Recognition is hollow lip service that the hesitant and weak European governments are using to show their enraged public that they're not holding their silence. People are being starved in Gaza, and Europe's reaction is to recognize a Palestinian state. Will this save starving Gazans? Israel can ignore these declarations with the U.S. support. So you've just talked about how the U.S. needs to use its leverage. But do you believe that it's a hollow statement?
I don't. If I did, I would not have asked you and told you that the Arab states worked for that, and I think it's important. It shows the isolation of the United States and Israel in the world, and in as much as it had impact on the European public to come around and support a Palestinian state, to force their governments to do that, hope it will work in the same way with the United States public and with the Israeli public. We see the opinion in Israel is changing as far as Mr. Netanyahu is concerned. There are now more Israelis who want him to step down than support him. In the United States, the hundreds of thousands of people who demonstrate in the streets and calling for a Palestinian state are indication that the tide is turning there. So I don't think it is hollow. Not only that, but by recognizing a Palestinian state with a border in the 67 borders as proposed by the UN Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338, there will be a definition of what Israel cannot do on the West Bank, for example, and Gaza. And that will force the Europeans to take more defined action against what Israel is doing. There will have to be economic consequences. There will have to be military consequences. They have to stop supplying Israel with military hardware and other actions like that. And this is, I think, what the Arab world is seeking, not just from the Europeans, but also from the United States.
So you know that recently the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, did something quite extraordinary, suspended weapons supplies to Israel. And obviously, given the terrible history of Germany, Nazi Germany, regarding the Jewish people, people took notice of what he did. I want to ask you to react to what Netanyahu and his allies say. Recognizing a Palestinian state is, quote unquote, rewarding the terrorists, rewarding Hamas. Do you believe that do you think that it would be a reward for Hamas, whether you call it a reward or not? Or do you think that it would isolate Hamas? In other words, does Hamas want a two-state solution?
Well, if you look at what the Saudi Arabia and France, for example, and the other countries that made a proposition recently at the United Nations to end the fighting in Gaza, they stipulated that Hamas must be disarmed. They condemned Hamas's actions on October 7th, and they were very specific about what needs to be done of getting back the Palestinian Authority to rule, not just in Hamas, but also in the West Bank. So there is a different story to the one that Mr. Netanyahu is proposing. There is no reward for Hamas here. Hamas is a terrorist organization that deserves to be outcast from any activity or rule in Palestine. But I would also add that Mr. Netanyahu himself is a terrorist who should be kicked out of office in Israel, and yet nobody is calling for his removal and his resignation and his trial according to the International Court of Justice.
Hamas has been designated a terrorist organization by the US and Europe. The Israeli government has not, so I'm just putting that out there. Netanyahu, on the other hand, has essentially just given a pretty rare interview to an Israeli television in which he sort of laid out his vision for what's going to happen next. There's this idea of going in and occupying the last stronghold in Gaza, Gaza City, the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza. And then he spoke about what would happen to the Gazans, saying he would, quote, allow them to leave. Take a listen.
Must Gaza remain a closed space? In all the other war zones, in the civil war in Syria, millions of people left. In Ukraine, millions left. In Afghanistan, millions left. And suddenly they determined that in Gaza, the civilians must be trapped? Give them the opportunity to leave. The most natural thing for all those saying that they care about the Palestinians and want to help the Palestinians would be for them to open their doors. Why are you coming and preaching to us? Open your doors. We'll let these people out, and we'll let them leave just like it's done in any other war zone.
Your reaction to that, Prince Turkey?
Well, that would be rewarding the terrorism of Netanyahu. That is the irony in all of this. Netanyahu, the perpetrator of genocide, wants to justify it by driving out the people of Palestine. Not only genocidal actions, but also ethnic cleansing. Is this acceptable? The fact that it happened in Syria, in Ukraine, and in others doesn't mean that it is right for it to happen in Palestine. So he's proposing even more the hardship and difficulty on people regardless of who they are. He is a totally, cuckoo person who only thinks of his own position, and he doesn't want to be put on trial and go to jail should he leave office.
But on the substance here, in terms of we know, because we've tried to cover it, ever since Hamas took over in Gaza, there was a de facto barricade around Gaza, certainly from the Israeli side and even for a long time from the Egyptian side on Rafah. They couldn't get out. They were trapped in what many people called an open-air prison that was designed to contain Hamas. So that's one point. The other point is, who would take Gazans? Because Egypt hasn't wanted to open its doors. I don't think any of the neighboring countries want to. And I wonder, would Saudi Arabia, for instance? And now, apparently, we're hearing reports that Israelis are talking to South Sudan, a country anyway embroiled in a civil war and famine and stuff, to take them.
The Netanyahu government wants to wash its hands of its murderous activity in Palestine. So it wants to lay it on others. Why don't you ask the Palestinians themselves? Ask the people in Gaza. Let Mr. Netanyahu allow you to survey the people in Gaza and send people in to ask the Gazans what they want to do and then follow what they want to do. It is not up to Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Israel or the UK or America. It's the Gazan people who should be asked. So if Mr. Netanyahu is serious about that, he should stop the fighting, allow humanitarian to go back in, and see if the Gazans want to leave. That's the logical step for anybody who wants to pursue logical courses. But he just simply wants to throw his mistakes and his criminal activity and its consequences on the others.
Can I ask you a question? Because I've interviewed you many times, and I've never heard you be so unplugged. That's a pop version. In your accusations against Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister. You're a long-term diplomat. Why have you taken this step tonight to use all these words?
Well, it's not just tonight, Yani. And if you had been listening to what are my statements, and if you have read my articles, you would have seen me saying similar things in the past. But, I'm up to here with what I hear from not just Netanyahu, but those who support Netanyahu. When he is lauded as a hero back in the United States, and, described as a savior of Israel and so on, it just boils my blood that somebody would think of a genocidal psychopath in those terms. And it is totally unacceptable to me. I can't do anything about that. I'm just a citizen who's retired for many years. I'm in my 80th year now, not much time left to live. But, I wish there would be an end to what is happening.
One of the prizes that Israel is aiming for is normalization with Saudi Arabia. How likely do you... I see you shaking your head.
Well, Ms. Amanpour, really, how can anybody expect Saudi Arabia to normalize with such a criminal or a genocidal maniac? There is no way that Saudi Arabia will normalize with Israel in the present state. Have peace. The kingdom was the one who presented the Arab Peace Initiative. It is there on the table. Just recently, as I mentioned before, the kingdom and France and other countries have put on the table a plan to end the fighting in Gaza and to go forward to an end to the hostilities between Israel and its neighbors. There is a whole history and backlog of Saudi action for peace. Normalization is not going to come before any of that. The Arab Peace Initiative is based on UN Security Council resolutions. International law should hold on these issues, not on simply abandoned and offering a prize here for a murderous psychopath like Mr. Netanyahu.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has also talked about, I think, for one of the rare times, a kind of future governance for Gaza. And he's talked about taking control and then handing it over to an Arab entity of some kind. I think that he is obviously everybody dismisses the notion, and so did you, of any Hamas involvement in the future. But I think he's also dismissed the notion of the PA, even a reformed PA, Palestinian Authority, doing that. What kind of an entity do you think, I mean, how do you think the day after should look? Once the things that you've said, like the end of the war, etc.
Just look at the proposal put forward by France and Saudi Arabia. There is a specific program to establish a governing authority in Gaza that will have the PA operating to provide all of the services of a government and a return to civil life and reconstruction and giving people hope for the future. It is all there in the Saudi-French plan. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as it were. The wheel has been invented for reaching peace in Palestine with the Arab Peace Initiative and now with the ending of the Gaza conflict through the French-Saudi plan. So I don't see any problem in implementing those ideas. I don't have any ideas because I'm not in government and I am not privy to what is and what can and cannot be done. But I read what I see in the press and I hear the statements of leaders like Monsieur Macron and King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and see that they are serious about having a concrete day after, as it were. So put it in practice. And instead of going for idea, look, Mr. Netanyahu now is talking about some kind of biblical image of Israel, and he's not hiding it. And he's even showing it on maps. That would be from the river to the river, from the Nile to the Euphrates. So which is he going to pursue? This one that you propose, or is he going to go for occupying Saudi and Syrian and Lebanese and Iraqi territory along with Palestine and Egypt? So he's that kind of person.
But, you know, you've talked about public opinion in Israel, which is very sort of, you know, it's very on the knife's edge. But certainly in the United States, you're correct, and it's a source of great distress for American Jews and allies of Israel, that certainly within the Democratic Party, within young people all across the United States, support is plummeting. But also, there are many who look at what Netanyahu and his government has done over the last, let's just say this past summer, with the degradation of Hamas, with the degradation of Hezbollah, with the degradation of Iran and its capability, with the, you know, departure in December of Syria, Bashar Assad. It looks like it's all going well from his perspective.
Well, I don't know if killing a lot of people is going well for his perspective. If that is the criteria for achieving success, I don't know what the criteria for failure is. His policy is what has put us in this position now. Look at it now. Really more than 100,000 Palestinians since the war started in October have been either killed or maimed or injured. Millions have been driven out of their homes. Everything has been destroyed. Is that a success story? On the contrary, I think it's a terrible consequence of this maniacal individual who simply cares about his position and not being put in jail.
Prince Turki Al-Faisal, thank you very much indeed for joining us.